Hello and welcome back to Bible Beginning to End, where we are reading through the scriptures from Genesis to Revelation. As always, I will be stopping along the way to ask many questions as we read through these scriptures together, but I won't be offering commentary or necessarily answering those questions, but I will give you time to pause and meditate on these scriptures and these questions, give you time for prayer, to see what God reveals to you about the scriptures and what conclusions you can come to on your own and with God as we're reading through these together. Right now, I am using the New Living Translation of the Bible, and there is a link in the episode if you want to read along to these chapters together, or if you just want to listen, you can do that as well. I also wanted to give a little update, an announcement at the beginning of this episode to let you guys know that starting next episode, I will be reading from a different translation of the Bible. If you've been with me for a while, you might already know a little bit about this, but I have been using the New Living Translation up until now to read through the Bible with you guys. But most modern translations of the Bible have a copyright on them, which means that I'm not allowed to just read the entire Bible from beginning to end without the permission of the publishers who publish the translation of the Bible that I want to read. So the New Living Translation gave me permission to use their translation within certain parameters. So they gave me a certain number of verses that they allowed me to read. And then after that, I would need to find another translation to use. So I asked around at a lot of different publishing houses that publish the Bible in different translations, and they either didn't give me permission or they would give me permission in very specific, narrow requirements that I would have to meet. So instead, I found a translation of the Bible that's actually in the public domain, which means that anyone is free to use it however they want, to read it, to reproduce it, as long as they're not, of course, changing the word of God. So the translation that I will be using moving forward is called the Berean Standard Bible. And I will put a link to the Berean Standard Bible in the description of this episode in case you want to look at it before next episode. It's a very well-respected translation of the Bible, and of course, it's not going to compromise on the Word of God. It's still the Word of God, and it's still written in a way that's easily accessible and easy to read and understand. So hopefully this will be a very seamless transition. Nothing will change about the podcast other than the translation of the Bible I'm using, and I always say at the beginning which one I'm reading from anyway, so I will remind you at the beginning of the next episode that that's the translation that we're using, but today we're still reading through with the New Living Translation. Also, one other quick announcement. I am updating the logo of the podcast, and hopefully I'll roll that out in the next episode at the same time that we switch to this new translation of the Bible. Nothing's going to change again. The podcast can be exactly the same, but in case you see a different picture in Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast, it's still me. I just had an artist take the logo that I already have and update it a little bit. So I hope you guys like it. I think you guys really will, but I just wanted to give you guys that heads up in case you're looking for the podcast and the icon looks a little different, but the name is still the same. Everything's still the same. It's still me. I just thought it might be a good time to update things a little bit. So anyways, thank you all for your support and for your prayers and for listening. And let's get on with the reason that we're all here today, which is to read through God's Word. So last time, we finished up the books of 1st and 2nd Kings, and where we left off in our story is that Israel and Judah were in exile. So Jerusalem had fallen, and Israel was exiled to Assyria, while Judah was exiled to Babylon. So they are under the control of these other empires. And you might be wondering, well, what's going to happen to them? What's the next part of this story? How will they get out of exile? Because that's quite a cliffhanger we were left on. But we will have to wait a little bit longer to find out, because the next two books that we're going to cover are 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and they are actually going to repeat a lot of information that we've read in the Old Testament, especially from 1st and 2nd Samuel and 1st and 2nd Kings. So why is that? I do actually want to give a little bit of background on the book of 1st and 2nd Chronicles before we jump in, so you kind of understand what we're getting into. and give a little bit of background as to why a bunch of information is going to be repeated. So, chronologically, in the timeline of the history of Israel, 1st and 2nd Kings was written during the exile, while Chronicles was written years later after the exile. And so one question you can go ahead and start asking yourself is, who were the original audiences that these books were written to? This is actually a great question to ask when you're reading any book of the Bible because it helps provide context, which is something that's important when you're reading through the scriptures. So if 1st and 2nd Kings was written during the exile, what was going on in Israel at that time? What do you think the culture was like, and how do you think everyone was feeling? And then if Chronicles was written after the exile, how do you think everybody was feeling then? And how does that context affect the purpose of these two books? And the reason it's important to think through that is a lot of times when we read through the Bible, we think, I already read this, or this is repeated, or these are just a bunch of lists of names. This might feel boring. This might feel unnecessary. But understanding this context helps us realize why these parts are necessary, why these things are repeated, why it's important for us to read and understand them. So originally, Chronicles was written after the exile, and it was also written as one book. But today we split it up into two, the first one ending at the end of David's reign as king, and 2nd Chronicles picking up with Solomon's reign as king, stories we should be familiar with from the last few books we've been reading. We also are not 100% sure who wrote 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Many people believe it was Ezra, which we'll read the book of Ezra soon, but that has not been confirmed. Also, whereas in our Bible, we see 1st and 2nd Kings and then 1st and 2nd Chronicles, in the traditional Hebrew Bible, Chronicles is the last book. So it's the last story in the traditional Hebrew Bible. And they place it last because it really summarizes these Old Testament scriptures. It summarizes the story of Israel, and the major theme of it is to instill hope in the people of Israel who had been exiled, hope for the future and hope toward a savior. And looking at the timeline of the history of everything that happened in the Old Testament, and chronologically, it is one of the last books of the Old Testament that was written. In the Christian Bible today, 1st and 2nd Chronicles is placed here after 1st and 2nd Kings traditionally, probably because it tells a lot of the same stories, so it's logical to group them together in that way. But I hope having some of this background and some of this history will help you to understand why 1st and 2nd Chronicles is here and why it's important not to skip it or gloss over it just because you already know these stories or you already have heard this before. So I know that's a lot more context than I usually give, but I just think it's important to understand the context of the books of the Bible, who they were written for, when they were written, who wrote them, and what part did they play in the greater story of the Bible and God and Jesus. So as we're reading through 1st and 2nd Chronicles, I hope that those questions roll around in your head a little bit. Why is this information repeated? Why is this here? What purpose does it serve? Why do I need to read these stories again? What information is repeated? What information is left out in 1st and 2nd Chronicles that showed up in 1st and 2nd Samuel or 1st and 2nd Kings? What are the differences? What are the similarities? And why are those differences there? So again, a lot more context than I usually give, but I think it's important to know. And so now we're going to go ahead and get started with 1st Chronicles. And today we're going to read through 1st Chronicles 1 through 11. And I will give you a warning. The first 9 chapters are genealogy. So we will be reading a lot of lists of names and a lot of lists of names that I will struggle to pronounce. So give me a little grace when it comes to that. I try my best, but I can't get everyone correct. So we will be reading through genealogy. So as we're reading, ask yourself, why is it important to have these genealogies listed? Why are these genealogies significant into the greater story of Christ? And it's just a reminder to me also that God knows everyone by name. He knows these genealogies. He knows every single person in history. He knows your name. He knows your family, and he knows you deeply. And so I just kind of like to remember that as I read through genealogies. Okay, so enough talking from me, and we will go ahead and get started with 1 Chronicles chapter 1, which begins with a section called From Adam to Noah's Sons. Chapter 1, verse 1. The descendants of Adam were Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and Noah. The sons of Noah were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Descendants of Japheth. The descendants of Japheth were Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tyrus. The descendants of Gomer were Ashkenaz, Rephath, and Togarmah. The descendants of Javan were Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Redanim. Descendants of Ham. The descendants of Ham were Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. The descendants of Cush were Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Raamah, and Sabteka. The descendants of Raamah were Sheba and Dedan. Cush was also the ancestor of Nimrod, who was the first heroic warrior on earth. Mizraim was the ancestor of the Luddites, Anamites, Lehabites, Naphtuhites, Pathrusites, Kozlahites, and the Caphtorites, from whom the Philistines came. Canaan's oldest son was Sidon, the ancestor of the Sidonians. Canaan was also the ancestor of the Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites, Girgashites, Hivites, Archites, Sinites, Arvadites, Zemarites, and Hamathites. Descendants of Shem. The descendants of Shem were Elam, Asher, Arphaxad, Lud, and Aram. The descendants of Aram were Uz, Hul, Gether, and Mash. Arphaxad was the father of Shelah. Shelah was the father of Eber. Eber had two sons. The first was named Peleg, which means division, for during his lifetime the people of the world were divided into different language groups. His brother's name was Joktan. Joktan was the ancestor of Almadad, Sheleph, Hazarmaveth, Jerah, Hadoram, Uzal, Diklah, Obal, Abimael, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Jobab. All these were descendants of Joktan. So this is the family line descended from Shem. Arphaxad, Shelah, Eber, Peleg, Ru, Serug, Nahor, Terah, and Abram, later known as Abraham. Okay, so pause there. Let's take a break. Did you recognize any of the names? Do you remember any of the stories associated with the people we just read the names of? As we're reading through these genealogies, not only are they telling us the history of the people of Israel, who they descended from, but it's also a reminder, these names, as we hear them, we will remember the stories associated with them, what they did for the people of Israel, what they did for God. And that was the genealogy from Adam to Noah's sons. Why is it important to include that far back? Why do we need to go all the way back to Adam? What is the significance of this genealogy? And then it ended, this section, with Abram, later known as Abraham. Who is Abraham? What did he do? Okay, The next section is descendants of Abraham, verse 28. The sons of Abraham were Isaac and Ishmael. These are their genealogical records. The sons of Ishmael were Nebaioth, the oldest, Kedar, Abdiel, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadad, Tema, Jeter, Naphish, and Kedema. These were the sons of Ishmael. The sons of Keturah, Abraham's concubine, were Zimron, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. The sons of Jokshan were Sheba and Dedan. The sons of Midian were Ephah, Epher, Hanok, Abida, and Eldaah. All these were descendants of Abraham through his concubine Keturah. The next section is descendants of Isaac. Verse 34. Abraham was the father of Isaac. The sons of Isaac were Esau and Israel. Descendants of Esau. The sons of Esau were Eliphaz, Reuel, Jush, Jalam, and Korah. The descendants of Eliphaz were Teman, Omar, Zepho, Gatam, Kenaz, and Amalek, who was born to Timnah. The descendants of Reuel were Nahath, Zerah, Shammah, and Mizah. Original peoples of Edom. The descendants of Seir were Lotan, Shobal, Zibeon, Anna, Dishon, Ezer, and Dishon. The descendants of Lotan were Hori and Himam. Lotan's sister was named Timnah. The descendants of Shobal were Alvan, Manahath, Ebal, Shepho, and Anam. The descendants of Zibeon were Aya and Anna. The son of Anna was Dishon. The descendants of Dishon were Hemdan, Eshba, Ithran, and Kiron. The descendants of Ezer were Bilhan, Zaavan, and Achan. The descendants of Dishon were Uz and Aran. Rulers of Edom. Verse 43. These are the kings who ruled in the land of Edom before any king ruled over the Israelites. Bela, son of Beor, who ruled from his city of Dinhabah. When Bela died, Jobab, son of Zerah from Basra, became king in his place. When Jobab died, Husham from the land of the Temanites became king in his place. When Husham died, Hadad, son of Bedad, became king in his place and ruled from the city of Avith. He was the one who destroyed the Midianite army in the land of Moab. When Hadad died, Samlah from the city of Masrekah became king in his place. When Samlah died, Shaul from the city of Rehoboth on the river became king in his place. When Shaul died, Baal-Hanan, son of Achbor, became king in his place. When Baal-Hanan died, Hadad became king in his place and ruled from the city of Pau. His wife was Mehetabel, the daughter of Matred and granddaughter of Mezahab. Then Hadad died. The clan leaders of Edom were Timnah, Alva, Jetheth, Ahalabama, Elah, Pinon, Kenaz, Teman, Mibzar, Magdiel, and Eram. These are the clan leaders of Edom. Okay, so pause there at the end of chapter 1. Why do we have the information about the descendants of Edom when they were an enemy of Israel? Why is that included here? Esau was the ancestor of the Edomites, and where does he fit in this story? Who is Esau's father? And remember that one purpose of these genealogies is that when God promises a Messiah, he is promised through the line of David. So these genealogies are listed and included as proof that when Jesus comes in the New Testament, it shows that he actually did come through the line of David, through the line of Abraham, as God promised. So if we're concerned with the line of David and concerned with that genealogy, then why include the genealogy of Edom? Why include the genealogy of everyone and not just the direct descendants of Jesus? Okay, so now we can start chapter 2, which begins with the descendants of Israel. And remember that Israel is another name for Jacob. Chapter 2, verse 1. The sons of Israel were Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Dan, Joseph, Benjamin, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. Okay, so pause there. Israel had 12 sons. What did these 12 sons represent in the Old Testament? The next section is descendants of Judah. Verse 3. Judah had 3 sons from Bathshua, a Canaanite woman. Their names were Er, Onan, and Shelah. But the Lord saw that the oldest son, Er, was a wicked man, so he killed him. Later, Judah had twin sons from Tamar, his widowed daughter-in-law. Their names were Perez and Zerah. So Judah had 5 sons in all. The sons of Perez were Hezron and Hamul. The sons of Zerah were Zimri, Ethan, Haman, Calcol, and Darda, 5 in all. The son of Carmi, a descendant of Zimri, was Achan, who brought disaster on Israel by taking plunder that had been set apart for the Lord. The son of Ethan was Azariah. From Judah's grandson Hezron to David. The sons of Hezron were Jerahmeel, Ram, and Caleb. Ram was the father of Amminadab. Amminadab was the father of Nahshon, a leader of Judah. Nahshon was the father of Salmon. Salmon was the father of Boaz. Boaz was the father of Abed. Abed was the father of Jesse. Jesse's first son was Eliab. His second was Abinadab. His third was Shemiah. His fourth was Nethanel. His fifth was Radai. His sixth was Azam. And his seventh was David. Their sisters were named Zeruiah and Abigail. Zeruiah had 3 sons named Abishai, Joab, and Asael. Abigail married a man named Jether, an Ishmaelite, and they had a son named Amasa. Other descendants of Hezron. Hezron's son Caleb had sons from his wife Azubah and from Jerioth. Her sons were named Jesher, Shobab, and Arden. After Azubah died, Caleb married Ephrathah, and they had a son named Hur. Hur was the father of Uri. Uri was the father of Bezalel. When Hezron was 60 years old, he married Gilead's sister, the daughter of Machir. They had a son named Segub. Segub was the father of Jair, who ruled 23 towns in the land of Gilead. But Gesher and Aram captured the towns of Jair, and also took Kenath and its 60 surrounding villages. All these were descendants of Machir, the father of Gilead. Soon after Hezron died in the town of Caleb Ephrathah, his wife Abijah gave birth to a son named Asher, the father of Tekoa. Okay, so pause there. Why do you think that sometimes during the genealogy, instead of just listing the names, they give us a little information about what happened at the time? They talked about some of the people who ruled, and they talked about some of the people who did wicked things. The writer added a little bit of historical context into some of this genealogy. So why do you think that is? Why do you think that's included? The next section is descendants of Hezron's son, Jerahmeel. Verse 25. The sons of Jerahmeel, the oldest son of Hezron, were Ram, the firstborn, Bunah, Oren, Azam, and Ahijah. Jerahmeel had a second wife named Atara. She was the mother of Anam. The sons of Ram, the oldest son of Jerahmeel, were Maaz, Jamin, and Eker. The sons of Anam were Shammai and Jada. The sons of Shammai were Nadab and Abishur. The sons of Abishur and his wife Abihail were Aban and Malad. The sons of Nadab were Seled and Appiam. Seled died without children, but Appiam had a son named Ishi. The son of Ishi was Sheshan. Sheshan had a descendant named Eli. The sons of Jada, Shammai's brother, were Jether and Jonathan. Jether died without children, but Jonathan had 2 sons named Peleth and Zaza. These were all descendants of Jerahmeel. Sheshan had no sons, though he did have daughters. He also had an Egyptian servant named Jarah. Sheshan gave one of his daughters to be the wife of Jarah, and they had a son named Attai. Attai was the father of Nathan. Nathan was the father of Zabad. Zabad was the father of Ephlal. Ephlal was the father of Abid. Abid was the father of Jehu. Jehu was the father of Azariah. Azariah was the father of Helez. Helez was the father of Eleasa. Eleasa was the father of Sismai. Sismai was the father of Shalom. Shalom was the father of Jechamiah. Jechamiah was the father of Elishama. Descendants of Hezron's son Caleb. The descendants of Caleb, the brother of Jerahmeel, included Mesha, the firstborn, who became the father of Ziph. Caleb's descendants also included the sons of Marishah, the father of Hebron. The sons of Hebron were Korah, Tappuah, Rechem, and Shema. Shema was the father of Raham. Raham was the father of Jorkeam. Rechem was the father of Shammai. The son of Shammai was Maon. Maon was the father of Beth-zur. Caleb's concubine, Ephah, gave birth to Haran, Moza, and Gazez. Haran was the father of Gazez. The sons of Jadai were Regem, Jotham, Geshan, Pelet, Ephah, and Sha'af. Another of Caleb's concubines, Ma'akah, gave birth to Sheber and Tirhana. She also gave birth to Sha'af, the father of Madmannah, and Sheva, the father of Mechbenah and Gibeah. Caleb also had a daughter named Aksa. These were all descendants of Caleb. Descendants of Caleb's son Hur. The sons of Hur, the oldest son of Caleb's wife Ephrathah, were Shobal, the founder of Kiriath Jearim, Salma, the founder of Bethlehem, and Hareph, the founder of Beth Gader. The descendants of Shobal, the founder of Kiriath Jearim, were Haroah, half the Manahathites, and the families of Kiriath Jearim, the Ithrites, Puthites, Shumathites, and Mishriites, from whom came the people of Zorah and Eshtaol. The descendants of Salma were the people of Bethlehem, the Netophathites, Atroth-Beth Joab, the other half of the Manahathites, the Zorites, and the families of scribes living at Jabez, the Tirathites, Shimeathites, and Sukathites. All these were Kenites who descended from Hamath, the father of the family of Rechab. Okay, so pause there at the end of chapter 2. Did any names stand out to you? Did you recognize any of the names or the people groups? Did you remember any of the stories about the people mentioned in chapter 2 and their significance in the history of the Israelites? Okay, so now we can start chapter 3, which begins with a section called The Descendants of David. And one question you can ask yourselves before we even get started is, who is David, and why is he significant to the story of Israel and the story of the Bible? Chapter 3, verse 1. These are the sons of David who were born in Hebron. The oldest was Amnon, whose mother was Ahinoam from Jezreel. The second was Daniel, whose mother was Abigail from Carmel. The third was Absalom, whose mother was Maacah, the daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. The fourth was Adonijah, whose mother was Haggith. The fifth was Shephatiah, whose mother was Abital. The sixth was Ithream, whose mother was Eglah, David's wife. These 6 sons were born to David in Hebron, where he reigned 7.5 years. Then David reigned another 33 years in Jerusalem. The sons born to David in Jerusalem included Shemua, Shobab, Nathan, and Solomon. Their mother was Bathsheba, the daughter of Ammiel. David also had 9 other sons, Iber, Elishua, Elpelet, Noga, Nepheg, Japhiah, Elishama, Eliada, and Eliphelet. These were the sons of David, not including his sons born to his concubines. Their sister was named Tamar. The next section is the descendants of Solomon. So this is a good time to think about who Solomon was, who he was as a king, who he was as a person. Verse 10. The descendants of Solomon were Rehoboam, Abijah, Asa, Jehoshaphat, Jehoram, Ahaziah, Joash, Amaziah, Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, Manasseh, Ammon, and Josiah. Okay, so pause there. Do any of those names sound familiar? And if any of those names sounded familiar, what part did they play in the history of Israel? Verse 15. The sons of Josiah were Johanan, the oldest, Jehoiakim the second, Zedekiah the third, and Jehoahaz the fourth. The successors of Jehoiakim were his son Jehoiakim and his brother Zedekiah. The next section is descendants of Jehoiakim. The sons of Jehoiakim, who was taken prisoner by the Babylonians, were Shalatiel, Malchiram, Pedaiah, Shenazar, Jechemiah, Hoshama, and Nedabiah. The sons of Pedaiah were Zerubbabel and Shammai. The sons of Zerubbabel were Meshullam and Hananiah. Their sister was Shelamith. His 5 other sons were Hashubah, Ohel, Berechiah, Hasadiah, and Jushab-Hesed. The sons of Hananiah were Pelatiah and Jeshiah. Jeshiah's son was Raphiah. Raphiah's son was Arnan. Arnan's son was Obadiah. Obadiah's son was Shechaniah. The descendants of Shechaniah were Shemaiah and his sons Hattush, Igal, Beriah, Neriah, and Shaphat, 6 in all. The sons of Neriah were Elionai, Hizkiah, and Arzikam, 3 in all. The sons of Elionai were Hodaviah, Eliashib, Peliah, Akub, Johanna, Deliah, and Anani, 7 in all. Okay, so pause there at the end of chapter 3 because I think we just need to take a break because reading through all these names can be difficult and can be tough to get through. So just take a breath and think about the people we just heard about. Did you recognize any of those names, or are you curious about any of those people and what they did in the history of Israel? Okay, so now we can start chapter 4, which begins with a section called Other Descendants of Judah. Chapter 4, verse 1. The descendants of Judah were Perez, Hezron, Carmi, Hur, and Shobal. Shobal's son, Raiah, was the father of Jahath. Jahath was the father of Ahumai and Lahad. These were the families of the Zorathites. The descendants of Etam were Jezreel, Ishma, Idbash, their sister Hazelelpani, Penuel, the father of Geder, and Ezer, the father of Husha. These were the descendants of Hur, the firstborn of Ephrathah, the ancestor of Bethlehem. Asher, the father of Tekoa, had 2 wives named Hilah and Naarah. Naarah gave birth to Ahuzam, Hefer, Temeni, and Haahashtari. Helah gave birth to Zereth, Izhar, Ethnan, and Koz, who became the ancestor of Anub, Zobaba, and all the families of Aharel, son of Harum. There was a man named Jabez, who was more honorable than any of his brothers. His mother named him Jabez because his birth had been so painful. He was the one who prayed to the God of Israel, "Oh, that you would bless me and expand my territory. Please be with me in all that I do and keep me from all trouble and pain." And God granted him his request. Okay, so pause there. Why does the author of Chronicles stop to tell us this story and remind us of what Jabez did? Verse 11. Caleb, the brother of Shua, was the father of Maher. Maher was the father of Eshton. Eshton was the father of Bethrapha, Paseah, and Tehina. Tehina was the father of Nahash. These were the descendants of Rekha. The sons of Kenez were Othniel and Sariah. Othniel's sons were Hathith and Meonathai. Meonathai was the father of Ophrah. Sariah was the father of Joab, the founder of the Valley of Craftsmen, so called because they were craftsmen. The sons of Caleb, son of Jephunneh, were Eru, Elah, and Naam. The son of Elah was Kenaz. The sons of Jehalelel were Ziph, Ziphah, Tiria, and Asarel. The sons of Ezra were Jether, Mered, Epher, and Jalon. One of Mered's wives became the mother of Miriam, Shammai, and Ishbah, the father of Eshtemoa. He married a woman from Judah who became the mother of Jared, the father of Geder, Heber, the father of Sako, and Jekuthiel, the father of Zanoah. Mered also married Bithiah, a daughter of Pharaoh, and she bore him children. Hodiah's wife was the sister of Naham. One of her sons was the father of Keilah, the Garmite, and another was the father of Eshtemoa, the Maakathite. The sons of Shimon were Amnon, Rinnah, Ben-Hanan, and Tilon. The descendants of Ishi were Zoheth and Ben-Zoheth. Okay, the next section is descendants of Judah's son, Shelah. Shelah was one of Judah's sons. The descendants of Shelah were the father of Lekah, Laadah, the father of Mareshah, the families of linen workers at Beth Ashbea, Jocham, the men of Kozeba, and Joash and Seraph, who ruled over Moab, and Jashubi Lehem. These names all come from ancient records. They were the pottery makers who lived in Netayim and Gedera. They lived there and worked for the king. The next section is the descendants of Simeon. The sons of Simeon were Jemuel, Jamin, Jarib, Zohar, and Shaul. The descendants of Shaul were Shalom, Mibsam, and Mishma. The descendants of Mishma were Hamuel, Zachar, and Shammai. Shammai had 16 sons and 6 daughters, but none of his brothers had large families, so Simeon's tribe never grew as large as the tribe of Judah. They lived in Beersheba, Malada, Hazar-Shul, Bilhah, Ezem, Tolad, Bethuel, Hormah, Ziklag, Beth Markaboth, Hazar-Susam, Beth Biri, and Sha'arim. These towns were under their control until the time of King David. Their descendants also lived in Etam, Ayin, Rimmon, Takin, and Ashan, 5 towns, and their surrounding villages as far away as Baalath. This was their territory, and these names are listed in their genealogical records. Other descendants of Simeon included Meshabab, Jamlik, Josha, son of Amaziah, Joel, Jehu, son of Joshibiah, son of Sariah, son of Asiel, Elani, Jaakaba, Jeshahiah, Asaiah, Adiel, Jezimiel, Benaiah, and Ziza, son of Shiphi, son of Alon, son of Jediah, son of Shimri, son of Shemaiah. These were the names of some of the leaders of Simeon's wealthy clans. Their families grew, and they traveled to the region of Gerar in the east part of the valley, seeking pasture land for their flocks. They found lush pastures there, and the land was spacious, quiet, and peaceful. Some of Ham's descendants had been living in that region, but during the reign of King Hezekiah of Judah, these leaders of Simeon invaded the region and completely destroyed the homes of the descendants of Ham and of the Maonites. No trace of them remains today. They killed everyone who lived there and took the land for themselves because they wanted its good pasture land for their flocks. 500 of these invaders from the tribe of Simeon went to Mount Seir, led by Pelatiah, Neriah, Raphiah, and Uzziel, all sons of Ishi. They destroyed the few Amalekites who had survived, and they have lived there ever since. Okay, so pause there at the end of chapter 4. Why does the author of Chronicles include this little section at the end about what some of the leaders of Simeon's wealthy class did and the places that they conquered and the people that they conquered? And then as we finish up this chapter, did you recognize any of the names, and are you able to connect them to any of the stories we've read before? We hear the name Caleb, whose story was told in Numbers 13 and 14 and Joshua 14 and 15. And we hear the name Othniel, whose story was told in Judges 1, 9 to 15 and 3, 5 to 11. So do you remember who these people are and what they did? Okay, so now we can start chapter 5, which begins with a section called Descendants of Reuben. Chapter 5, verse 1. The oldest son of Israel was Reuben, but since he dishonored his father by sleeping with one of his father's concubines, his birthright was given to the sons of his brother Joseph. For this reason, Reuben is not listed in the genealogical records as the firstborn son. Okay, so pause there. Who is Joseph? And why is it significant that Joseph is listed as the firstborn son of Israel rather than Reuben? Verse 2. The descendants of Judah became the most powerful tribe and provided a ruler for the nation, but the birthright belonged to Joseph. The sons of Reuben, the oldest son of Israel, were Hanok, Palu, Hezron, and Carmi. The descendants of Joel were Shemaiah, Gog, Shammai, Micah, Raiah, Baal, and Beerah. Beerah was the leader of the Reubenites when they were taken into captivity by King Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria. Beerah's relatives are listed in the genealogical records by their clans: Jeiel, the leader, Zechariah, and Bela, son of Azaz, son of Shema, son of Joel. The Reubenites lived in the area that stretches from Aroer to Nebo and Baal-Meon. And since they had so many livestock in the land of Gilead, they spread east toward the edge of the desert that stretches to the Euphrates River. And during the reign of Saul, the Reubenites defeated the Hagrites in battle. Then they moved into the Hagrite settlements all along the eastern edge of Gilead. The next section is the descendants of Gad, verse 11. Next to the Reubenites, the descendants of Gad lived in the land of Bashan as far east as Selecah. Joel was the leader in the land of Bashan, and Shopham was second in command, followed by Janai and Shaphat. Their relatives, the leaders of 7 other clans, were Michael, Meshullam, Sheba, Jerai, Jachin, Zia, and Eber. These were all descendants of Abihail, son of Huri, son of Jeroah, son of Gilead, son of Michael, son of Jeshishai, son of Jado, son of Buz. Ahi, son of Abdiel, son of Guni, was the leader of their clans. The Gadites lived in the land of Gilead in Bashan and its villages and throughout all the pasture lands of Sharon. All of these were listed in the genealogical records during the days of King Jotham of Judah and King Jeroboam of Israel. The next section is the tribes east of the Jordan. There were 44,760 capable warriors in the armies of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. They were all skilled in combat and armed with shields, swords, and bows. They waged war against the Hagrites, the Jederites, the Naphishites, and the Nodabites. They cried out to God during the battle, and he answered their prayer because they trusted him. So the Hagrites and all their allies were defeated. The plunder taken from the Hagrites included 50,000 camels, 250,000 sheep and goats, 2,000 donkeys, and 100,000 captives. Many of the Hagrites were killed in the battle because God was fighting against them. The people of Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh lived in their land until they were taken into exile. Okay, so pause there. Why is the author of Chronicles telling this story about Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh succeeding in this battle? And why was God fighting against the Hagrites? And what exile are they talking about here at the end of verse 22 when it says they lived in their land, talking about Reuben, Gad, and Manasseh, lived in their land until they were taken into exile? You might go back to 2 Kings 15:29 to 17:41 to help you with this answer. Verse 23. The half-tribe of Manasseh was very large and spread through the land from Bashan to Baal-Hermon, Senir, and Mount Hermon. These were the leaders of their clans: Epher, Ishi, Eliel, Azriel, Jeremiah, Hodaviah, and Jadiel. These men had a great reputation as mighty warriors and leaders of their clans. But these tribes were unfaithful to the God of their ancestors. They worshipped the gods of the nations that God had destroyed. So the God of Israel caused King Pul of Assyria, also known as Tiglath-Pileser, to invade the land and take away the people of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh as captives. The Assyrians exiled them into Halah, Habor, Hara, and the Gazan River, where they remain to this day. Okay, so pause there at the end of chapter 5. Okay, so remember that 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, it's kind of a retelling of what's happened so far to the kingdom of Israel. So right now, what story did we just hear about in these last few verses? What exile are they talking about? And who is being taken into exile by the Assyrians? Remember that Israel was split. It was divided into 2 kingdoms, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. The southern kingdom being Judah and Benjamin, and then the northern kingdom being the other tribes of Israel. So which kingdom are we talking about here that was being taken into exile by Assyria? Okay, so now we can start chapter 6, which begins with a section called the priestly line. Chapter 6, verse 1. The sons of Levi were Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. The descendants of Kohath included Amram, Izhar, Hebron, and Uzziel. The children of Amram were Aaron, Moses, and Miriam. The sons of Aaron were Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. Eleazar was the father of Phinehas. Phinehas was the father of Abishua. Abishua was the father of Bukki. Bukki was the father of Uzzi. Uzzi was the father of Zariah. Zariah was the father of Miriath. Miriath was the father of Amariah. Amariah was the father of Ahitub. Ahitub was the father of Zadok. Zadok was the father of Ahimaaz. Ahimaaz was the father of Azariah. Azariah was the father of Johanan. Johanan was the father of Azariah, the high priest at the temple built by Solomon in Jerusalem. Azariah was the father of Amariah. Amariah was the father of Ahitub. Ahitub was the father of Zadok. Zadok was the father of Shallum. Shallum was the father of Hilkiah. Hilkiah was the father of Azariah. Azariah was the father of Sariah. Sariah was the father of Jehozadak, who went into exile when the Lord sent the people of Judah and Jerusalem into captivity under Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, so pause there. What do you remember about the clan of Levi? What was their purpose in society and what set them apart from other tribes? And did you hear any familiar names in this section of genealogy? I know we heard of Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. They were probably the most notable people that you heard throughout that list. So do you remember what they did and what role they played in the Old Testament? And did you recognize any other names in this section? And then it ends this little section saying that the people of Judah and Jerusalem went into captivity under Nebuchadnezzar. Who is Nebuchadnezzar? And which nation did he rule? Was he the ruler of Assyria or Babylon? And when they say that Judah and the people of Jerusalem went into exile under King Nebuchadnezzar, are we talking about the northern kingdom or the southern kingdom? Because remember, the tribes of Israel split into two kingdoms, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. So which kingdom was Judah and Jerusalem a part of? Okay, so the next section is the Levite clans. Verse 16. The sons of Levi were Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. The descendants of Gershon included Libni and Shammai. The descendants of Kohath included Amram, Izhar, Hebron, and Uzziel. The descendants of Merari included Mali and Mushi. The following were the Levite clans listed according to their ancestral descent. The descendants of Gershon included Libni, Jahath, Zimmah, Joah, Edo, Zerah, and Jetheri. The descendants of Kohath included Aminadab, Korah, Aser, Elkanah, Abiasaph, Aser, Tahath, Uriel, Uzziah, and Shaul. The descendants of Elkanah included Amasai, Ahimoth, Elkanah, Zophai, Nahath, Eliab, Jeroham, Elkanah, and Samuel. The sons of Samuel were Joel, the older, and Abijah, the second. The descendants of Merari included Mali, Libni, Shammai, Uzzah, Shemaiah, Haggai, and Asaiah. The next section is the temple musicians. Verse 31. David assigned the following men to lead the music at the house of the Lord after the ark was placed there. They ministered with music at the tabernacle until Solomon built the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem. They carried out their work following all the regulations handed down to them. These are the men who served along with their sons. Haman, the musician, was from the clan of Kohath. His genealogy was traced back through Joel, Samuel, Elkanah, Jeroham, Eliel, Toah, Zuph, Elkanah, Mahath, Amasai, Elkanah, Joel, Azariah, Zephaniah, Tahath, Aser, Abiasaph, Korah, Izhar, Kohath, Levi, and Israel. Haman's first assistant was Asaph from the clan of Gershon. Asaph's genealogy was traced back through Berechiah, Shemiah, Michael, Baasai, Malchijah, Ethni, Zerah, Adiah, Ethan, Zimmah, Shammai, Jahath, Gershon, and Levi. Haman's second assistant was Ethan from the clan of Merari. Ethan's genealogy was traced back through Kishi, Abdi, Malach, Hashabiah, Amaziah, Hilkiah, Amzi, Bani, Shemer, Mali, Mushi, Merari, and Levi. Their fellow Levites were appointed to various other tasks in the tabernacle, the house of God. Okay, so pause there. Why do you think David appointed all these musicians? What role does music play in our relationship with God? And what do you think music looked like during this time, during the time of the tabernacle and the time of David? What do you think the music consisted of? What do you think it sounded like? What instruments do you think they played during this time? And the next section is Aaron's descendants. Do you remember who Aaron was? Do you remember what role he played in the community of Israel? Verse 49, starting the section Aaron's descendants. Only Aaron and his descendants served as priests. They presented the offerings on the altar of burnt offerings and the altar of incense, and they performed all the other duties related to the most holy place. They made atonement for Israel by doing everything that Moses, the servant of God, had commanded them. The descendants of Aaron were Eleazar, Phinehas, Abishua, Buki, Uzi, Zerahiah, Meraioth, Amariah, Ahitub, Zadok, and Ahimaaz. Okay, so pause there. It says that Aaron and his descendants performed all the duties related to the most holy place. Do you remember what the most holy place is in the tabernacle, what purpose it serves? This is something that we talked about in Exodus, chapters 25 to 31 and 35 to 40. So you might go back there and read about the tabernacle to help you with this answer. Okay, the next section is territory for the Levites. Verse 54. This is a record of the towns and territory assigned by means of sacred lots to the descendants of Aaron who were from the clan of Kohath. This territory included Hebron and its surrounding pasture lands in Judah. But the fields and outlying areas belonging to the city were given to Caleb, son of Jephunneh. So the descendants of Aaron were given the following towns, each with its pasture lands: Hebron, a city of refuge, Libnah, Jotter, Eshtemoa, Holon, Debir, Ain, Juttah, and Beth Shemesh. And from the territory of Benjamin they were given Gibeon, Geba, Alameth, and Anathoth, each with its pasture lands. So 13 towns were given to the descendants of Aaron. The remaining descendants of Kohath received 10 towns from the territory of the half-tribe of Manasseh by means of sacred lots. The descendants of Gershon received by sacred lots 13 towns from the territories of Issachar, Asher, Naphtali, and from the Bashan area of Manasseh east of the Jordan. The descendants of Merari received by sacred lots 12 towns from the territories of Reuben, Gad, and Zebulun. So the people of Israel assigned all these towns and pasture lands to the Levites. The towns in the territories of Judah, Simeon, and Benjamin, mentioned above, were assigned to them by means of sacred lots. The descendants of Kohath were given the following towns from the territory of Ephraim, each with its pasture lands: Shechem, a city of refuge in the hill country of Ephraim, Gezer, Jokmeam, Beth Horon, Aijalon, and Gath Rimmon. The remaining descendants of Kohath were assigned the towns of Honor and Bileam from the territory of the half-tribe of Manasseh, each with its pasture lands. The descendants of Gershon received the towns of Golan in Bashan and Ashtaroth from the territory of the half-tribe of Manasseh, each with its pasture lands. From the territory of Issachar, they were given Kadesh, Debaroth, Ramoth, and Anem, each with its pasture lands. From the territory of Asher they received Mashal, Abdon, Hukok, and Rahab, each with its pasture lands. From the territory of Naphtali they were given Kadesh in Galilee, Hammon, and Kiriathaim, each with its pasture lands. The remaining descendants of Merari received the towns of Jokneam, Karta, Rimmon, and Tabor from the territory of Zebulun, each with its pasture lands. From the territory of Reuben, east of the Jordan River, opposite Jericho, they received Bezer, a desert town, Jahaz, Kedemoth, and Mephith, each with its pasture lands. And from the territory of Gad, they received Ramoth in Gilead, Mahanaim, Heshbon, and Jazer, each with its pasture lands. Okay, so pause there at the end of chapter 6. Why were the Levites given all of these territories from each of the different tribes of Israel? Why didn't they have just one singular territory that just belonged to the Levites like the other tribes did? And there was one city early in this section in verse 57 that was called a city of refuge. Hebron was designated as the city of refuge. What was a city of refuge? Why did they need one particular city or territory designated as a city of refuge? And then something else that's repeated in this section is that they were given these territories after they cast sacred lots. What are sacred lots? Do you remember seeing those being used before in the Old Testament in other books? What does that mean, and how did they use sacred lots? Okay, so now we can start chapter 7, which begins with a section called the Descendants of Issachar. Chapter 7, verse 1. The 4 sons of Issachar were Tola, Puah, Joshub, and Shimron. The sons of Tola were Uzzi, Raphiah, Jeriel, Jemai, Ibsam, and Shemuel. Each of them was the leader of an ancestral clan. At the time of King David, the total number of mighty warriors listed in the records of these clans was 22,600. The son of Uzzi was Izrahiah. The sons of Izrahiah were Michael, Obadiah, Joel, and Ishiah. These 5 became the leaders of clans. All of them had many wives and many sons, so the total number of men available for military service among their descendants was 36,000. The total number of mighty warriors from all the clans of the tribe of Issachar was 87,000. All of them were listed in their genealogical records. The next section is the descendants of Benjamin. Verse 6. 3 of Benjamin's sons were Bela, Becher, and Jediel. The 5 sons of Bela were Ezbon, Uzzi, Uzziel, Jeremoth, and Eri. Each of them was the leader of an ancestral clan. The total number of mighty warriors from these clans was 22,034, as listed in their genealogical records. The sons of Becher were Zemirah, Joash, Eleazar, Elionai, Omri, Jeremoth, Abijah, Anathoth, and Alameth. Each of them was the leader of an ancestral clan. The total number of mighty warriors and leaders from these clans was 20,200, as listed in their genealogical records. The son of Jediel was Bilhan. The sons of Bilhan were Jeush, Benjamin, Ehud, Kenana, Zethan, Tarshish, and Ahishahar. Each of them was the leader of an ancestral clan. From these clans, the total number of mighty warriors ready for war was 17,200. The sons of Ur were Shuppim and Huppim. Hushim was the son of Aher. The next section is the descendants of Naphtali. Verse 13. The sons of Naphtali were Jaziel, Guni, Jezer, and Shillem. They were all descendants of Jacob's concubine, Bilhah. The next section is the descendants of Manasseh. Verse 14. The descendants of Manasseh through his Aramean concubine included Azriel. She also bore Machir, the father of Gilead. Machir found wives for Huppim and Shuppim. Machir had a sister named Maacah. One of his descendants was Zelophehad, who had only daughters. Machir's wife Maacah gave birth to a son whom she named Peresh. His brother's name was Sheresh. The sons of Peresh were Ulam and Rakem. The son of Ulam was Bedin. All these were considered Gileadites, descendants of Machir, son of Manasseh. Machir's sister, Hameleketh, gave birth to Ishad, Abiezer, and Mala. The sons of Shemida were Ahian, Shechem, Leki, and Aniam. The next section is the descendants of Ephraim. Verse 20. The descendants of Ephraim were Shetulah, Bered, Tahath, Eliada, Tahath, Zabad, Shuthelah, Ezer, and Eliad. These two were killed trying to steal livestock from the local farmers near Gath. Their father Ephraim mourned for them a long time, and his relatives came to comfort him. Afterward, Ephraim slept with his wife, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. Ephraim named him Beriah because of the tragedy his family had suffered. He had a daughter named Shirah. She built the towns of Lower and Upper Beth Horon and Uzzen Shirah. The descendants of Ephraim included Repha, Resheph, Tela, Tahan, Ladan, Ammihud, Elishama, Nun, and Joshua. The descendants of Ephraim lived in the territory that included Bethel and its surrounding towns to the south, Naran to the east, Gezer and its villages to the west, and Shechem and its surrounding villages to the north as far as Aiah and its towns. Along the border of Manasseh were the towns of Bethshan, Ta'anak, Megiddo, Dor, and their surrounding villages. The descendants of Joseph, son of Israel, lived in these towns. The next section is the descendants of Asher. The sons of Asher were Imnah, Ishva, Ishvi, and Beriah. They had a sister named Sarah. The sons of Beriah were Heber and Malchiel, the father of Berziath. The sons of Heber were Japhlet, Shamer, and Hotham. They had a sister named Shua. The sons of Japhlet were Pasak, Bemal, and Ajvath. The sons of Shamer were Ahi, Raga, Huba, and Aram. The sons of his brother Helem were Zophah, Imnah, Shalesh, and Amal. The sons of Zapha were Sua, Harnepher, Shual, Beri, Imrah, Bezer, Had, Shema, Shilsha, Ithran, and Bera. The sons of Jether were Jephanah, Pispa, and Ara. The sons of Ulla were Ara, Haniel, and Rizia. Each of these descendants of Asher was the head of an ancestral clan. They were all select men, mighty warriors, and outstanding leaders. The total number of men available for military service was 26,000, as listed in their genealogical records. Okay, so pause there. At the end of chapter 7, we read a lot of names, and we didn't really stop along the way this time in this chapter. But as we close chapter 7, I want you to think about, were there any names that stood out? You might have heard the name Joshua. You might have heard the name Joseph that might be familiar from the Old Testament. Did anyone stand out that you knew? And did anyone stand out that you didn't know that you wanted to learn more about? Also, were there any stories about any of these tribes of Israel that you didn't know before? Did they go into any details that were new to you? Okay, so now we can start chapter 8, and this is going to end the section of genealogies, which might let you breathe a sigh of relief, or if you love genealogies and you love hearing all of these names, well, this is going to be the last section for that right now. There are other genealogies throughout the Bible, but just for First Chronicles, this is where the section on genealogies is going to end. So here we go with chapter 8, verse 1, and this is the section called The Descendants of Benjamin. Chapter 8, verse 1. Benjamin's first son was Bela. The second was Ashbel. The third was Ahara. The fourth was Noha. And the fifth was Rapha. The sons of Bela were Ader, Gera, Abihud, Abishua, Naaman, Ahoa, Gera, Shephaphan, and Huram. The sons of Ehud, leaders of the clans living in Geba, were exiled to Manahath. Ehud's sons were Naaman, Ahijah, and Gera. Gera, who led them into exile, was the father of Uzzah and Ahihud. After Shaharaim divorced his wives Husham and Baara, he had children in the land of Moab. His wife Hadesh gave birth to Jobab, Zibiah, Mesha, Malcolm, Jaaz, Sakia, and Mirma. These sons all became the leaders of clans. Shaharaim's wife Husham had already given birth to Abitub and Elpaal. The sons of Elpaal were Eber, Misham, Shemed, who built the towns of Ano and Lod, and their nearby villages, Beriah and Shema. They were the leaders of the clans living in Aijalon, and they drove out the inhabitants of Gath. Ahio, Shashak, Jeremoth, Zebediah, Arad, Eder, Michael, Ishba, and Joah were the sons of Beriah. Zebediah, Meshullam, Hizki, Heber, Ishmerai, Isliah, and Jobab were the sons of Elpaal. Jocham, Zikri, Zabdi, Elionai, Zilathai, Eliel, Adiah, Beriah, and Shimrath were the sons of Shammai. Ishban, Eber, Eliel, Abdon, Zikri, Hanan, Hananiah, Elam, and Thethijah, Ifdiah, and Penuel were the sons of Shashak. Shamsharai, Shahariah, Athaliah, Jaareshia, Elijah, and Zikri were the sons of Jeroam. These were the leaders of the ancestral clans. They were listed in their genealogical records, and they all lived in Jerusalem. Okay, the next section is the family of Saul. So before we begin this section, do you remember who Saul was and why he was significant in the history of Israel? Chapter 8, verse 29. Jael, the father of Gibeon, lived in the town of Gibeon. His wife's name was Maacah, and his oldest son was named Abdon. Jael's other sons were Zur, Kish, Baal, Ner, Nadab, Gedor, Ahio, Zechariah, and Mikloth, who was the father of Shemeam. All these families lived near each other in Jerusalem. Ner was the father of Kish. Kish was the father of Saul. Saul was the father of Jonathan, Malchishua, Abinadab, and Eshbaal. Jonathan was the father of Meribaal. Meribaal was the father of Micah. Micah was the father of Pithon, Melech, Tariah, and Ahaz. Ahaz was the father of Jada. Jada was the father of Alameth, Osmaveth, and Zimri. Zimri was the father of Mazah. Mazah was the father of Beniah. Beniah was the father of Raphiah. Raphiah was the father of Eliasa. Eliasa was the father of Azel. Azel had 6 sons, Azrikam, Bacharu, Ishmael, Shariah, Obadiah, and Hanan. These were the sons of Azel. Azel's brother, Eshek, had 3 sons. The first was Ulam, the second was Jeush, and the third was Eliphalet. Ulam's sons were all mighty warriors and expert archers. they had many sons and grandsons, 150 in all. All these were descendants of Benjamin. Okay, so pause there at the end of chapter 8. You can take a breath because we have finished reading the long lists of names and all of the genealogies for now. We'll still talk about different names and you'll still hear some different names, but it won't be just this straight genealogy anymore. So again, I want to ask, did any names stick out to you when we read through that? Did anything interest you? Were there any names that you wanted to know more about? Anyone that you did know about? Anything that stuck out to you? And when we were reading through the genealogies, did you wonder why were they structured and presented to us in the way that they were? We saw them kind of split up by the different tribes of Israel. Why do you think the genealogies were presented in this way? Okay, so now we can start chapter 9. And the first verse of chapter 9 says, "So all Israel was listed in the genealogical records in the book of the kings of Israel." And the next section is the returning exiles. The people of Judah were exiled to Babylon because they were unfaithful to the Lord. The first of the exiles to return to their property in their former towns were priests, Levites, temple servants, and other Israelites. Some of the people from the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, Ephraim, and Manasseh came and settled in Jerusalem. Okay, so pause here real quick at the beginning of this chapter. What exile is the author of Chronicles talking about? Where were they exiled to? And then if Chronicles is telling the story of Israel, why is he talking about people who returned from exile at the beginning of 1 Chronicles? Obviously, we're 8 chapters in. This is the beginning of chapter 9, but remember the first 8 chapters were all genealogy. And so right after the genealogy, he's talking about the people who came back after the exile. So why do you think the author puts this section here instead of at the end of 2 Chronicles, at the end of the whole story? Verse 4. One family that returned was that of Uthai, son of Amihud, son of Omri, son of Imri, son of Benai, a descendant of Perez, son of Judah. Others returned from the Shilonite clan, including Asaiah the oldest and his sons. From the Zerahite clan, Juel returned with his relatives. In all, 690 families from the tribe of Judah returned. From the tribe of Benjamin came Salu, son of Meshullam, son of Hodaviah, son of Hasanua, Ibniah, son of Jeroam, Elah, son of Uzzi, son of Mikri, and Meshullam, son of Shephatiah, son of Reuel, son of Ibnijah. These men were all leaders of clans, and they were listed in their genealogical records. In all, 956 families from the tribe of Benjamin returned. The next section is the returning priests. Among the priests who returned were Jediah, Jehoiarib, Jachin, Azariah, son of Hilkiah, son of Meshullam, son of Zadok, son of Marioth, son of Ahitub. Azariah was the chief officer of the house of God. Other returning priests were Adiah, son of Jeroam, son of Pashur, son of Malchijah, and Maasai, son of Adiel, son of Jazerah, son of Meshullam, son of Meshilemeth, son of Immer. In all, 1,760 priests returned. They were heads of clans and very able men. They were responsible for ministering at the house of God. The next section is the returning Levites. The Levites who returned were Shemaiah, son of Hashub, son of Azrikam, son of Hashabiah, a descendant of Merari, Bakbacher, Haresh, Galal, Mattaniah, son of Micah, son of Zikri, son of Asaph, Obadiah, son of Shemaiah, son of Galal, son of Jeduthun, and Berechiah, son of Asa, son of Elkanah, who lived in the area of Netapha. The gatekeepers who returned were Shalom, Akub, Talmon, Ahiman, and their relatives. Shallum was the chief gatekeeper. Prior to this time, they were responsible for the king's gate on the east side. These men served as gatekeepers for the camps of the Levites. Shallum was the son of Kori, a descendant of Abiasaph, from the clan of Korah. He and his relatives, the Korahites, were responsible for guarding the entrance to the sanctuary just as their ancestors had guarded the tabernacle in the camp of the Lord. Phinehas, son of Eleazar, had been in charge of the gatekeepers in early times, and the Lord had been with him. And later, Zechariah, son of Meshelemiah, was responsible for guarding the entrance to the tabernacle. In all, there were 212 gatekeepers in those days, and they were listed according to the genealogies in their villages. David and Samuel the seer had appointed their ancestors because they were reliable men. These gatekeepers and their descendants, by their divisions, were responsible for guarding the entrance to the house of the Lord when that house was a tent. The gatekeepers were stationed on all four sides, east, west, north, and south. Their relatives in the villages came regularly to share their duties for 7-day periods. The 4 chief gatekeepers, all Levites, were trusted officials, for they were responsible for the rooms and treasuries at the house of God. They would spend the night around the house of God since it was their duty to guard it and to open the gates every morning. Some of the gatekeepers were assigned to care for the various articles used in worship. They checked them in and out to avoid any loss. Others were responsible for the furnishings, the items in the sanctuary, and the supplies such as choice flour, wine, olive oil, frankincense, and spices. But it was the priests who blended the spices. Mattatiah, a Levite and the oldest son of Shallum the Korahite, was entrusted with baking the bread used in the offerings, and some members of the clan of Kohath were in charge of preparing the bread to be set on the table each Sabbath day. The musicians, all prominent Levites, lived at the temple. They were exempt from other responsibilities since they were on duty at all hours. All these men lived in Jerusalem. They were the heads of Levite families and were listed as prominent leaders in their genealogical records. Okay, so pause there at the end of each section. I want you to reflect on all the different jobs they talked about. We heard about the priests. We heard about those in charge of worship, the musicians. We heard about the people baking the bread for the Sabbath. We heard about the gatekeepers. What was significant about each person's role in the community after they came back from exile? And why do you think it was important that they put these practices in place? Okay, so now we're going to finish up chapter 9, and the way we kind of divide this up is until this point, we've really been talking about the genealogy of Israel as a nation, and now we're going to kind of shift gears to talking about the founding of the kingdom. So we're going to start out with talking about King Saul, who was the first king of Israel, and talking about his family, and then it will go through the different kings of Israel. So the next section is King Saul's family tree. Verse 35. Jael, the father of Gibeon, lived in the town of Gibeon. His wife's name was Maacah, and his oldest son was Abdon. Jael's other sons were Zur, Kish, Baal, Ner, Nadab, Gedor, Ahio, Zechariah, and Mikloth. Mikloth was the father of Shemeam. All these families lived near each other in Jerusalem. Ner was the father of Kish. Kish was the father of Saul. Saul was the father of Jonathan, Malchishua, Abinadab, and Eshbaal. Jonathan was the father of Meribaal. Meribaal was the father of Micah. The sons of Micah were Pithon, Melech, Tariah, and Ahaz. Ahaz was the father of Jada. Jada was the father of Alameth, Osmaveth, and Zimri. Zimri was the father of Mazzah. Mazzah was the father of Bineah. Bineah's son was Raphiah. Raphiah's son was Eliasa. Eliasa's son was Azel. Azel had 6 sons whose names were Azrikam, Bacharu, Ishmael, Shariah, Obadiah, and Hanan. These were the sons of Azel. Okay, so pause there at the end of chapter 9. We had some more lists of names, and we will continue having those lists of names, but what other information did we get in this chapter? Was it just a list of names, or was there a little more history mixed in? How was it presented to us in chapter 9? And what part of Israel's history was covered in chapters 1 through 9? We saw the history of the people of Israel. We saw them go into exile. And then we saw some of the people coming back from exile. And then as we start chapter 10, we're going to kind of be going back in time to when Saul was king, like we just set up at the end here of chapter 9. So now it's going to take us back to before exile so we can see what led up to that exile and see the history of the kings who ruled Israel during the time leading up to exile. So remember, this is information that we have already read, that we read in 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Samuel. Some of that information was there. So as we're reading through, think about what information is presented. Is it information you've heard before? And think about also what information is left out. What did the author of Chronicles choose to put into this summary of the people of Israel, and what did the author choose to leave out? Okay, so now we can start chapter 10, which begins with a section called The Death of King Saul. Chapter 10, verse 1. Now the Philistines attacked Israel, and the men of Israel fled before them. Many were slaughtered on the slopes of Mount Gilboa. The Philistines closed in on Saul and his sons, and they killed 3 of his sons, Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. The fighting grew very fierce around Saul, and the Philistine archers caught up with him and wounded him. Saul groaned to his armor-bearer, "Take your sword and kill me before these pagan Philistines come to taunt and torture me." But his armor-bearer was afraid and would not do it. So Saul took his own sword and fell on it. When his armor-bearer realized that Saul was dead, he fell on his own sword and died. So Saul and his 3 sons died together, bringing his dynasty to an end. When all the Israelites in the Jezreel Valley saw that their army had fled and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their towns and fled. So the Philistines moved in and occupied their towns. The next day, when the Philistines went out to strip the dead, they found the bodies of Saul and his sons on Mount Gilboa. So they stripped off Saul's armor and cut off his head. Then they proclaimed the good news of Saul's death before their idols and to the people throughout the land of Philistia. They placed his armor in the temple of their gods, and they fastened his head to the temple of Dagon. But when everyone in Jabesh Gilead heard about everything the Philistines had done to Saul, all their mighty warriors brought the bodies of Saul and his sons back to Jabesh. Then they buried their bones beneath the great tree at Jabesh, and they fasted for 7 days. So Saul died because he was unfaithful to the Lord. He failed to obey the Lord's command, and he even consulted a medium instead of asking the Lord for guidance. So the Lord killed him and turned the kingdom over to David, son of Jesse. Okay, so pause there at the end of chapter 10. So this section, this chapter, covers a part of the Bible that we read in 1 Samuel 31, 1-13, and it talks about the death of King Saul. Did you learn anything new from this retelling of the story? Did anything new stand out to you? Was there anything different about this telling of the story? Did hearing it retold this way give you a better understanding of what was going on at the time? Okay, so now we can start chapter 11, which begins with a section called David becomes king of all Israel. So Saul was the first king, and now we're moving into David's reign. And I'll try to give you, when I can, where else this information is found in the Old Testament. So if it comes from 2 Samuel, I'll try to give you those references along the way. So David becomes king of all Israel. That's the first section, and these first few verses retell apart from 2 Samuel 5, 1 through 5. So chapter 11, verse 1. Then all Israel gathered before David at Hebron and told him, "We are your own flesh and blood. In the past, even when Saul was king, you were the one who really led the forces of Israel. And the Lord your God told you, you will be the shepherd of my people Israel. You will be the leader of my people Israel." So there at Hebron, David made a covenant before the Lord with all the elders of Israel, and they anointed him king of Israel, just as the Lord had promised through Samuel. Okay, the next section is David captures Jerusalem, which was also told in 2 Samuel 5, 6 through 10. Verse 4. Then David and all Israel went to Jerusalem, or Jebus, as it used to be called, where the Jebusites, the original inhabitants of the land, were living. The people of Jebus taunted David, saying, "You'll never get in here." But David captured the fortress of Zion, which is now called the City of David. David had said to his troops, "Whoever is first to attack the Jebusites will become the commander of my armies." And Joab, the son of David's sister Zeruiah, was first to attack, so he became the commander of David's armies. David made the fortress his home, and that is why it is called the City of David. He extended the city from the supporting terraces to the surrounding area, while Joab rebuilt the rest of Jerusalem. And David became more and more powerful because the Lord of Heaven's armies was with him. Okay, so pause there. I just want you to think about, as we're reading through the story of David, what is the author of Chronicles emphasizing about David and David's story? And considering the time period that Chronicles is being written after the exile, and as a way to summarize what Israel has gone through, why do you think the author chooses to emphasize these aspects of the story over others? The next section is David's mightiest warriors, and this is also told in 2 Samuel 23, 8 to 17. So chapter 11, verse 10. These are the leaders of David's mighty warriors. Together with all Israel, they decided to make David their king, just as the Lord had promised concerning Israel. Here is the record of David's mightiest warriors. The first was Jeshobeam, the Hakmonite, who was the leader of the 3 mightiest warriors among David's men. He once used his spear to kill 300 enemy warriors in a single battle. Next in rank among the 3 was Eleazar, son of Dodai, a descendant of Ahoah. He was with David when the Philistines gathered for battle at Pasdamim and attacked the Israelites in a field full of barley. The Israelite army fled, but Eleazar and David held their ground in the middle of the field and beat back the Philistines. So the Lord saved them by giving them a great victory. Once when David was at the rock near the cave of Adullam, the Philistine army was camped in the valley of Rephaim. The 3, who were among the 30, an elite group among David's fighting men, went down to meet him there. David was staying in the stronghold at the time, and a Philistine detachment had occupied the town of Bethlehem. David remarked longingly to his men, "Oh, how I would love some of that good water from the well by the gate in Bethlehem." So the 3 broke through the Philistine lines, drew some water from the well by the gate in Bethlehem, and brought it back to David. But David refused to drink it. Instead, he poured it out as an offering to the Lord. "God forbid that I should drink this," he exclaimed. "This water is as precious as the blood of these men who risked their lives to bring it to me." So David did not drink it. These are examples of the exploits of the three. Okay, so pause there. Why do you think that the author of Chronicles chose to include these stories about the three mightiest warriors in David's army? What did they do for the people of Israel? What did they do for David? And what did they do for God? Okay, now we can start this last section of chapter 11, which, give you a little warning, it is going to have a lot of names that we'll have to read through, but it's not all just a list of names. But this section is called David's 30 Mighty Men, and it's also told in 2 Samuel 23:18-39. So chapter 11, verse 20. Abishai, the brother of Joab, was the leader of the 30. He once used his spear to kill 300 enemy warriors in a single battle. It was by such feats that he became as famous as the three. Abishai was the most famous of the 30 and was their commander, though he was not one of the three. There was also Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, a valiant warrior from Kabzeel. He did many heroic deeds which included killing 2 champions of Moab. Another time, on a snowy day, he chased a lion down into a pit and killed it. Once, armed only with a club, he killed an Egyptian warrior who was 7.5 feet tall and who was armed with a spear as thick as a weaver's beam. Benaiah wrenched the spear from the Egyptian's hand and killed him with it. Deeds like these made Benaiah as famous as the 3 mightiest warriors. He was more honored than any other member of the 30, though he was not one of the 3. And David made him captain of his bodyguard. Okay, so pause there. Why do you think the author of Chronicles highlighted these 2 warriors of the 30, Abishai and Benaiah? Because the next group is going to be mostly just a list of the warriors. So what stood out about these 2 men that the author of Chronicles wanted to highlight? Verse 26. David's mighty warriors also included Asahel, Joab's brother, Elhanan, son of Dodo from Bethlehem, Shammah from Harod, Helez from Pelon, Ira, son of Akesh from Tekoa, Abiezer from Anathoth, Sibbecai from Husha, Zaman from Ahoah, Maharai from Netophah, Heled from Baanah from Netophah, Ithai, son of Rabai from Gibeah in the land of Benjamin, Benaiah from Pirathon, Hurai from near Nahali Gaash, Abi-Alban from Arba, Osmaveth from Bahurim, Eliabah from Shaalban, the sons of Joshan from Gizon, Jonathan, son of Shagi from Harar, Ahim, son of Sharar from Harar, Eliphal, son of Hefer from Mechera, Ahijah from Pelon, Hezro from Carmel, Paarai, son of Ezbai, Joel, the brother of Nathan, Mebar, son of Hagri, Zelek from Ammon, Naharai from Beeroth, the armor-bearer of Joab, son of Zeruiah, Ira from Jodar, Gareb from Jodar, Uriah the Hittite, Zabad, son of Alai, Adina, son of Shiza, the Reubenite leader who had 30 men with him, Hanan, son of Maacah, Joshaphat from Mithna, Uzziah from Ashtaroth, Shammah and Jael, the sons of Hotham, from Aroer, Jediel, son of Shimri, Joha, his brother, from Tiz, Eliel from Mahava, Jerubai and Joshaviah, the sons of Elnaam, Ithma from Moab, Eliel and Abed, Jaasel from Zaba. Okay, so pause there at the end of chapter 11, where we're stopping for today. Did you recognize any of those names, any of those men who were listed as some of David's mighty men? Okay, so that is where we're going to stop today in First Chronicles, about halfway through First Chronicles. So just take a deep breath. Congratulations for getting through that long list of names. That's never easy, but it's part of our history. It's part of our scripture. And so it's there for a reason. And it's important to read and try to figure out, why is this here? What is the significance of it? And what does this reveal to us about God and His Word? So thank you so much for listening this week, or to this episode whenever you might be listening to it. I'm so thankful for each of you. I'm thankful for all of your support and all of the messages that I receive. I really appreciate it, and I love hearing all of your stories. So keep on going, keep on listening, keep on praying, keep on studying, and I will talk to you in the next one.